While I'm recording this, India and Pakistan are in the middle of war, and the Indian armed forces have launched Operation Sindoor to avenge the coward and terrorist activities that we saw from the side of the Pakistan army and ISIS. I feel that this is the right time that we should invoke the powers of the great gods. And this is no coincidence that this episode is around the Devi Mahatmya. Why I feel this is a great coincidence is that the Devi Mahatmya was the original Operation Sindoor. This was the first time when the good prevailed over evil, when all the gods invoked the military power of the divine feminine to defeat the evils. The Devi Mahatmya is the story of the triumph of good over evil. It is the story of Ma Durga in all her forms, destroying the evil forces of Mahishasura. In this very powerful and timely episode of Discovery of an Author, we sit down again with Dr. Raj Balkaran, who's a Sanskrit scholar and who has actually done his PhD from Oxford in Devi Mahatmya. I feel that we need such texts in today's time to understand our military prowess, to understand that even in such times, we already knew what to do, that we were always a military nation and that we were always a nation that stood for its people, for the security of its people and for the welfare of its people. The Devi Mahatmya also tells us something very, very, very profound that even the modern world is not ready to accept. And that is, the God is a she. That God is a female. That we are not living in a man's world. We are living in a woman's world. Watch this episode. You'll be amazed by its philosophy. You'll be amazed to know that this ancient text is still 100 years ahead of the present times that we're living in. Listen to this episode to awaken the martial spirit in you and to invoke the blessings and the power of the Mother Divine. And please subscribe to this episode if you find value with what we are doing and continue to support us to get such amazing authors for you. Thank you. Dr. Raj, namaste and welcome back to Discovery of an Author podcast. I'm very excited and it is truly an honor. And thank you for giving us time again to come on the podcast. Your wisdom, your inputs are extremely valuable. The way you explain things are remarkable, and that we have seen from the previous podcast that we did on the asanas and the entire, more or less, the Indian wisdom ecosystem. That is how we packaged it. People have really loved it. They have really appreciated it. And Dr. Raj, welcome again. And thank you for taking your time for this.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Dr. Raj, today we are going to have a discussion on a very important text. In India also, we have all heard about the text, but not a lot of people know exactly what the text is about. This is the Devi Mahatmya. And you have actually written two books on the text, The Goddess and the King, and The Goddess and the Sun in the Indian mythology and wisdom. Now, Dr. Raj, before we start understanding what this text is all about, there are certain fundamental things which I wanted to establish and know from you. And I feel that this will provide a very strong base for people to know where this is coming from and why we are having a discussion on this thing. So, Dr. Raj, the first thing that I want to know from you is your story. What attracted you specifically? So we know about you from the previous podcast. You were very generous when you introduced yourself. But I specifically want to, because you have done a PhD and you have specifically done PhD in the Indian wisdom ecosystem, Indian spirituality, Indian wisdom ecosystem, and Devi Mahatmya has been your primary topic of study. In India, when I hear the word PhD and Devi Mahatmya, couldn't understand because it's very less. You don't see people doing PhDs in subjects in India. It's non-existing. So that is the first thing. So I want to know, Dr. Raj, what attracted you towards Devi Mahatmya? How did you get introduced to it? And why did you decide that you want to deepen your understanding of this text? Let's first start with your personal association with this beautiful text.
Yeah, I think that that question involves a number of strands, two or three strands that came together at the right time. One strand was the scholarship strand. So I had started a bachelor's degree at the University of Toronto in literature, English literature and history and philosophy. And the goal was to teach. I wanted to be a high school teacher at the time, perhaps do some administration for the school board. And I left school. I worked in the private sector for a little bit and ended up returning to school to finish a degree by virtue of this one course that I found, Intro Hinduism. This was September 2004. Um, I didn't even know religious studies was a discipline. I discovered it in my dentist chair over my lunch hour at my office. Oh, wow. And I discovered it the day it started. Oh, this is starting today. Oh, but I can't take this course today. I'm working an evening shift in the hospitality industry. Long story short, I ended up taking the course. It changed my life because I ended up finishing a degree in religious studies. Really, what I was interested in was literature and history and philosophy, but to do that in the Indic context. In those days, it was difficult to impossible unless you were doing it through religious studies. So, all of those loves were sort of transplanted to the Indic context through religious studies. And so I finished my degree. I did a master's on the Valmiki Ramayana. That's another vast, beautiful text. It took me a while to realize that what I really loved was story more than anything else. Unconsciously, what I was really drawn to is the power of story because I have a superpower for interpreting stories, and that superpower rests on the back of a superpower for interpreting people. Stories are people, stories are personalities. And when you understand, when you see a story that doesn't make sense, you feel betrayed by the story. See, this person betrayed you, this character doesn't land, it doesn't make sense. So there's a certain rhythm of experiences within across humanity that we see in story, that we see in human behavior. And so I was very much drawn to the Ramayana, but I was very much drawn to this tension between ascetics and kings. Why does Rama behave like an ascetic? He's a kshatriya. He's supposed to rule the world. Why is he behaving like a yogi or a sadhu? And why is he celebrated for this? Is Lakshmana not correct by saying, "What are you doing?
Yeah.
Everybody should suffer because of this nonsense. Common rule. What is this?" And so I was really fascinated by that tension. I call it the Dharmic double helix, this push and pull between the worldly and the otherworldly, Laukika, Laukika. This is the heart of Hinduism, really, in many ways. That Hinduism is so much about the world and navigating the world. And Hinduism also has these strands that are very otherworldly and are very geared towards renouncing the world, and the Bhagavad Gita brings it all together. And so I was really interested in that Ramayana. And so I had this academic journey. But when I did this undergraduate course, I actually was taught by a woman who was a sessional instructor, the tenured professor who was to have taught the course, Arti Dand. She was on maternity leave. And so the sessional instructor introduced me to a friend of hers who ran a yoga studio. At the yoga studio, there was a guru, Mantriji. He was teaching there and who became my guru. And so after the master's, after the BA, I did a master's. I did it part time because I was doing a great deal of work and I was doing a lot of one on one training with Mantriji. So those 3 years, say 2007 to 2010, it was the master's and the master. It was one, it was one or the other. It was academic training as well as spiritual training. And I never really thought to integrate them in a sense because I sort of understood they were different lanes. If you're doing scholarship, you're doing it well, and if you're doing spirituality, you're doing it well, and you don't sort of you don't venture into spirituality or pseudoscience for a scholarly question. And similarly, there are modes of understanding that cannot be processed by your left brain, and so I understood that sort of nuance. And see, Mantraji introduced me to a great many things, and he was teaching on a great many things, but he initiated a number of us into the Chandi Path. Maybe not fully, perhaps yours truly fully, but many of us were doing what we're doing. He was doing moksha, moksha, moksha at the time. He was trained in many, many, many of the Vidyas. But by the time I met him, for the last 12 years of his life, it was Moksha Shastra, Patanjali, Yoga Sutras, forget Ayurveda, Jyotisha, we're waking up, right? And so, but amid the waking up, we would get together once or twice a week and collectively chant some hymns from the Chandi Path, also known as the Devi Mahatmya, hymns to Durga. or Shakti, however you want to think of it. And so these initiations are going on, and there was a real interest in the Devi. He was actually, I think, the one who really sparked my interest in the Devi. I was aware of the Devi as part of a Hindu household, of course. How could one not be? But really, it was Mantriji who initiated me into Durga Sadhana and really sparked a deep interest in the Chandi Path. Now, at the time, I finished the master's. I took a year off. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do the PhD. I thought I would, and an opportunity came up to work with a scholar of the Puranas at the University of Calgary, and it dawned on me that this great Devi Mahatmya is framed by a conversation between an ascetic and a king, a forest-dwelling sage and a king. Here again, we have the tension between ascetics and kings that we see in the Ramayana, we see in so many places, and this is the very frame of the Devi Mahatmya. So I thought, well, let me turn my intellectual interest to the frame of the Devi Mahatmya and do some work to figure out what's going on here, how do we make sense of this? And that became my PhD project. But prior to that time, I never really thought of engaging a work of sadhana through the intellectual lens, because there's certain symphonies that you might enjoy hearing or playing or performing ragas. You may not think, well, let me do a project on the musical history of this. You may not think it's sort of like, let me psychoanalyze my mother type thing, right? It's pun intended in this case. It's about the Divine Mother. But then it was useful because the academic training really was foundational. Another piece is storytelling. So I tell stories. I tell narrative stories. So when I use the Devi Mahatmya for a retreat setting or a workshop, seminar, class setting, I could lecture on it academically. We can chant from it spiritually, and I can storytell from it. It's such a powerful text in that it has this status as a mainstay Puranic narrative that also moonlights as liturgy. It has a living ritual recitational tradition around it as well. The ways in which that tradition engages a Devi Mahatmya, whether as a story, whether as a historical entity, whether one is thinking about it in terms of where it comes from, whether one engages it for a Chandi Homam, for example, during Navratri.
Yeah.
It lends itself to the various layers of being. So it's very much a holistic text. In addition to that, I don't think we realize how radical it is to say, by the way, God is a Bhagwan, is a she.
Yeah.
By the way, FYI, God's a she. You didn't know this, did you? God's a she. This is a profound idea.
Yeah.
In the history of religion, certainly, particularly as compared to Abrahamic traditions, which is exactly the opposite. But even within the Hindu world, you have Brahman, you have masculine deities, you have small g goddesses. But this is the first time we see Amba, Jagadamba, mother of creation of the world. And so it's a radical text. It's a radical text that speaks to so many parts of our being that I feel deeply holds great wisdom for the turning of the tides of our times, for us to integrate this feminine consciousness as a complement to the masculine patriarchal consciousness. I feel the Devi Mahatmya holds a core piece for our civilization at this time.
Sorry for the interruption, but our YouTube statistics show that around 65% of all of you who are consistently consuming our episodes are not subscribing to our channel. So this is my request to all of those who do enjoy our content and are finding value in it, to please subscribe to our channel. This is the only way in which we can grow. Thank you, and please continue watching and listening to this episode. So what is interesting is when you said that you first got intrigued to approach this text completely from a perspective of theoretical, the intellectual part. Okay, let me see. I'm intrigued. I first want to understand. But then you said that there are basically a lot of mantras, and when you talked specifically about homas, right? Homa basically is a fire offering that you do to a particular deity. I'm correct, right? Homa is a fire offering that you do.
Correct. Yeah, Agnihotra,
Agnihotra, Havana that you do. And then you talked about the layer of beings. What do you mean about that?
Well, when you're engaged in a ritual, there is an experiential dimension. If you are having an experience of music or mantra or ritual, if you're playing a sport, there's an experiential dimension. Above and beyond the experiential, you can now have a step back where you're intellectualizing and understanding intellectually what is happening. Okay. Above and beyond that, when they are reciting all the verses into the sacred fire, it's actually a story. Once upon a time, there was a king. You can engage it also on the storytelling level. So the text holds within it, invites you to engage it from so many levels of your being.
So it's like, so there is definitely, so if I, take the lens of a scientist, for example, for just to understand, because any subject that
An academic, a scholar,
an academic, because like any subject that I or we take up, we have books. There is a theoretical aspect to it, then there is the practical aspect to anything. Be it a sport, be it a subject. So there are theoretical physicists, and then they are actually the practical physicists who read the theoretical physicist theory and they try to replicate that into their labs with equipments. So is this approach also correct? So there is a theoretical aspect of the text, and then there are practices. There are sadhanas that could be done by understanding of the text, which can lead you, and that depends what you really want to get out of it. And that is obviously something that is subjective to your own experiences and basically what you desire. So this text, like any other subject you are saying, could be approached in that way in itself, wherein there is a theoretical part of it. Once you do understand, there are practical steps that you can then do, be it in the form of a sadhana, be it in the form of a homa, be it in the form of a mantra chanting towards that particular subject that we are calling Devi. And then that depends on person to person, that what experiences they are getting and what is the understanding that they're getting out of it. Is this the right way to approach it from a very skeptical and a very rational lens, Dr. Raj?
Yeah, I think that there's certainly the lowest hanging fruit for most individuals is the academic or scholarly or intellectual lens, where we have a text that we can try and make sense of if we read it. We may try to make sense of the cultural context. We may try to make sense of the work it's doing within culture, within religion, the philosophy that encodes. We may engage it intellectually, overarchingly, as a product of culture that's amenable to being understood along the lines of social, cultural forces that we can discern. The discernible world, intellectual scholarly inquiry, one. Then there is another mode of engaging the text that has less to do with the forces of culture which shape it and has to do with direct spiritual experience. So there are sadhakas. There are those who seek knowledge in an informational sense, and there are those who seek knowledge in a transformational sense, where they're looking for that knowledge which transforms the very knower. So there are those who want to engage it, just like music. There are those who want to understand the phrase, the structure, the history, and there are those who want to be moved by its power.
Makes sense. So again, it depends on how far somebody wants to go. There are certain people who just limit themselves to the theoretical knowledge of a subject. And there are people who then take it ahead to the experiential as well, be it on any vertical, be it of any topic.
Yes. Well, what I would say is that description might suggest that one is further than the other. I would say it depends on how far one wants to go in which direction.
Yeah.
So
sense.
One can have a sort of armchair understanding. One can go quite far in an intellectual understanding, right? Without being spiritual. There are many instructors, professors, teachers who may or may not be spiritual.
Yeah.
And then one may want to go kind of in the spiritual direction. One may want to kind of have maybe a bit of a feel-good experience, or one may want to have a powerful darshan, right? Yeah. So it depends on how far, but in which direction towards a an objective understanding of it towards an intellectual understanding of it versus a subjective experiential understanding of it.
Beautiful. Now, Dr. Raj, again, another question which will I want some clarity on the fundamentals of things, because we're talking about, you spoke about the Shakti vertical, Shakta or Shaktism. So we have the Vaishnavism, which is the all the stories and everything and rituals related to Lord Vishnu. Then you had Shaivism, which is all the stories and all the rituals and worship related to Lord Shiva. And then there is a Shaktism. So these are the three predominant verticals that people are aware of. Vaishnavism and Shaivism in India are extremely powerful. And there was a time wherein both the verticals were within conflict. I have read stories, I've even seen movies wherein there was a very strong conflict between the Vaishnavites and the Shaivites, each claiming that their deity is the supreme being. So now I want to understand what is Shakti? Because once we first understand it, only then we'll come to the various texts and things which are associated with that. So first I want to know, what is Shakti? Is it a force? Is it consciousness? Because where I get confused when people speak about Shakti, and when you also say that the God is a she, because we are human beings living in a society wherein there are two sexes, male and female. So when somebody says Shakti is the female, I always imagine a female wearing a sari. But I don't think if that is the correct way. I think that is just a human representation of what we can understand, right? So whenever somebody says Shakti, I imagine a girl or a woman in a sari with multiple hands. But I don't think if that is the real thing. So what is the definition of Shakti? And then what is the Shaktism, the vertical of Shakti? Because worship can only start once you discover something. Till the time you haven't discovered something, how can you create an ecosystem around that? So Dr. Raj, what is Shakti? What is the meaning of Shakti? And why do we worship Shakti?
So the answer to that question will depend upon one's starting place and one's mode of inquiry. So on a spiritual level, Shakti is sacred power. It's divine power, spiritual energy, spiritual force. That Shakti can be imbibed. It can be cultivated. There are those who have more Shakti than others, and therefore they have more gravitas. Their words have more power, their actions have more power, their eyes have more luster, their face has more sheen, irrespective of health or age. They are more spiritually empowered. Their presence is palpable. When such a one enters one's life is not the same, whether it is for a simple conversation at a bus stop or a podcast or a course or who knows what meal. Their field is energized. And so every gesture, every word, every act creates far more impact because they are spiritually empowered. So an empowerment comes from the imbibing of Shakti. There are those who consciously cultivate Shakti, whether through an Indic paradigm or whether through, perhaps, if the stars align and one finds a paradigm within the Catholic Church to cultivate what they might call the Spirit, the Holy Spirit. There are those who are invested more than others in the Holy Spirit, for example. So we can think of Shakti as spiritual divine power, which can be cultivated and wielded. Now, it may not always be wielded for noble aims. It may be wielded for selfish purposes. But let's bracket that off for a moment, right? So if we think of it in a common sense level as a spiritual force or power, yes, one of the key ideas is that power is personified as a she. It's mythologized as a divine mother. So one way to think of it is that spiritual power is the source of creation. And that spiritual principle is mythologized as the Divine Mother birthing creation. Right? So whether we think of it symbolically and we think of it anthropomorphically, however we relate to it, the idea is that there is a divine power that can be cultivated, and that divine power is actually presented to us with a feminine face, as a feminine force.
Because uh, right now, what we get to hear is that people generally, when they try to explain the concept of creation or divinity, it is divided into two forms, the male and the female, the masculine and the feminine, and specifically with respect to the Indic cultures, Shiva and Shakti, right? So
Sure.
it's like Shiva is the one who is the embodiment of the masculine energy, from which Shiva is an entity from which everything sprouts, be it theory, be it concepts, be it knowledge. Because in our stories, all I have heard is that there was a time when Shiva was telling Parvati what is yoga, or Shiva was telling Parvati what is this, what is that, and some or the another entity heard it, transmuted it, transformed things. So in my mind, the picture is always like this: there is one masculine entity called Shiva, who is the originator of everything. And once he has conceptualized everything, and when he wants to act to practically implement that concepts, then that energy becomes Shakti. Then that female aspect of his aspiration, so his aspiration and his will to do something becomes the feminine part of it. And that is when she executes his will. So it's like saying, if I'm sitting like this and I just got an idea and I'm like, oh, let's do. So the moment from this to this, whatever made me go from this to this is the Shakti. Because now I'm trying to execute that idea that was sprouted in my mind. So that is how I understand the division of Shiva and Shakti. That one is the originator of seeds, and then how do you actually nurture that seed into a tree? Giving fruits is what Shakti tries to do. Is it correct in a way? Is it good of an explanation to understand how their play works, the divine masculine and the divine feminine?
I think that is one relatively common construction of the interplay. I think that the interplay between Shiva and Shakti in this context has to do with tantric ideas about the interplay of masculine and feminine in the cosmos and within the self. What I would say is that there perhaps is a androcentric or perhaps a patriarchal overlay to a narrative
Yes.
where Shiva is boss, Shakti is the maid servant, bring me chai, the bringing of chai
Yes.
is Shakti, the drinker of chai is masculine, and the maker of chai is feminine.
Yeah.
So we may want to think through whether or not, well, Shiva is there, and then Shiva summons Shakti in order to do something, because Shakti is power. What about the power to sit? Is Shakti not there even when he's sitting? What about the power to be? Is Shakti not there even when he's being? So the Devi Mahatmya is actually revolutionary in that it's saying Shakti, the Devi Mahatmya has a feminine first ideology. The feminine is primordial. The feminine comes first. We all come from the body of a woman. We all have an X chromosome. The ancients could not have ignored the fact that the feminine produces the fecundity of life. And it may well be the masculine's insecurity around that power, whereby we have mythologizations which subjugate the feminine. The most glaring example might be Abrahamic myth or ideology, where there is no feminine, and if there is, it's problematic. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was void without form, and the Spirit of God moved over the face of the deep. What deep? Face of the waters. What waters? That is the ancient Near Eastern feminine principle. In the Babylonian myth, that's Tiamat. That is the feminine primordial waters that's subjugated by Elohim, by God in the Hebrew Bible. And that act is very much an act that is androcentric or perhaps patriarchal in a sense. And so what is radical about the Devi Mahatmya is that the feminine is primordial, she's perennial, she is first, and all things emerge from her, right? She's there even before Brahma creates. So I do think there's a great deal of merit in what you had said earlier. I do want to point out that perhaps that's being transmitted through a patriarchal bias.
Yeah, I agree, because you are absolutely right, Dr. Raj. When I deepened my own personal readings of Sri Aurobindo and Mother, and specifically when I read Savitri, he is very clear when he says that she is the creatrix. Full stop. She is the creatrix. There is no one beyond her. For him, it is she who created everything else, including the great gods. He used to call them the great gods. So he's like, she's beyond the great gods. Something you can't fathom, something you can't.
That's precisely what the Devi Mahatmya
Yeah,
is mythologizing. She's beyond the
absolutely.
great gods.
Beyond the great gods. Dr. Raj, now we'll another fundamental questions, and then we'll deep dive into the Devi Mahatmya. I understand that the first time the Devi Mahatmyam was referenced was in the Markandeya Purana. Now, before we move on, I first want you to tell us the basic definitions of what is a Veda, what is a Upanishad, and what is a Purana, and their significances, because even if we don't know this, there is no point in going beyond. So please explain the fundamentals of Vedas. What are Vedas? What are Upanishads? What are Puranas? What are the differences, if there are any, in all these three type of storytellings?
Those three classes of text refer to vast swaths of time that are more or less the three ages, if you will, of Hinduism, in that order. And these classes of texts are more of a genus than a species, in that there will be variation within the Vedic corpus. There'll be variation within the Upanishads. There'll be variation within the Puranas, but nevertheless, you can discern certain features. So, for example, a house cat is different from a panther, from a lion, from a tiger. Nevertheless, you'll see some similarity. But the ancient Vedic corpus, the Rig Veda, certainly is a collection of hymns to Indra and
Agni.
pantheon of Agni, Soma, the dawn, the sun god, Mitra of Haruna. It's a collection of hymns to various Vedic deities. There's more than that, because there are four overarching branches. There's a lot there. The Atharva Veda is very different from the Rig Veda. So there's a lot of diversity there, right? There's a lot going on in the Vedic corpus. But they differ in large part from the Upanishads, which is another revolutionary wave where we have texts that prioritize philosophical, spiritual inquiry. It's not to say that there isn't inquiry or wonder in the Vedic text. There are, but they have a different purpose, and they are used for priestcraft. They're used for rituals, whereas the Upanishads are staunchly anti-ritual,
Interesting.
anti-society. The Upanishads were, in their genesis, a revolution from the margins of society, which critiqued the Vedic sacrifice, critiqued caste. This was a time of great religious revolution across the subcontinent, probably somewhere around 8th to 5th century BCE. It is hazardous to date texts in this context. But nevertheless, some of these movements were so revolutionary, they entirely broke away with Brahmanism. One of them is called Buddhism. Another is called Jainism. But many of these movements were very wisely, or perhaps prudently, folded back into Brahmanism. And so the Upanishads, although very different in their contents, although they are the essence of Hindu philosophy, of the wisdom of waking up, they have to do with pursuing the Atman, with finding a spiritual teacher, a different sort of education, not just a Vedic education, but an education that gears one towards waking up, realizing the supreme, realizing Atman. So they're not about navigating through society, the way, for example, the caste system or relation to the gods um, might be geared towards. They are crafted to facilitate navigation of being, and they are inward looking, not so much outward looking. And so they're revolutionary, but they get folded back in. So all of the Upanishads belong to one of the four schools of the Vedic corpus. They get kind of folded in. And to this day, we have the Vedas and the Upanishads as equal in their canonical orthodox status as Shruti, that which was heard.
Yeah.
They're considered apaurushaya,
Yeah.
unauthored, created without purusha, without human intervention, inspired, but not authored, not from human origin. Everything that comes beyond the Upanishads, beyond sort of 5th century BC, to use a crude date, would be considered a paurushaya, authored. So therein we find Itihasa Purana, we find the epics, Ramayana, the Mahabharata, authored Vyasa Valmiki. Yes, we find the Puranas, right? So these texts are considered smriti, that which was remembered by their authors, their paurushaya, they're authored. And the epics, in my view, are crucial for bringing together the Vedic thought and the Upanishadic thought. So the epics all feature kings who renounce not only their kingship and live out somewhere in the court, they renounce the world. They're the center of the world. They leave the world and renounce. And this is the exchange between the laukika, worldly values of Vedic society, and the alaukika, otherworldly values of Upanishadic thought. And I think the epics bring these together brilliantly. And there is no real Hinduism proper. I don't mean in terms of practice, in terms of a label or something we can think of as an entity before the Mahabharata. I think much like Genesis and certainly Exodus crafts the history of a people, similarly the Mahabharata crafts the history of a people, where now we have a thing that we could think of as Hinduism that's a little more clear from the Mahabharata onwards. But to my mind, the project of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata is to integrate and fortify culture like only narrative, only story can. Now, this storytelling continues. Well, storytelling doesn't continue. Storytelling has always been there. In the Vedic times, there were stories told on the ground, like in every culture, that we don't even know of because they've been lost to us or they've been kept alive on the ground and now appear in what are now the Puranas. The Puranas are the writing down of tales of old, ancient Purana. These are the tales of old, the mythological tales. They are compendia of lore, of ancient Indian lore about seers and kings and very strange things, but they also include a great deal of instruction, right? They're not monolithic. They include a great deal. You might even have Dhanurveda, for example. You might even have the science of archery. You may even have statecraft. So they hold in a great deal of knowledge, but the overarching scaffolding of the Puranas is stories, lore, tales of old. And one of these great Puranas, the Mahapuranas, is called the Markandeya Purana. It is authored by, narrated by Markandeya Mahamuni, the great sage Markandeya. And the Devi Mahatmya consistently finds a home in the Markandeya Purana. Tradition has decided to put the Devi Mahatmya in the mouth of Markandeya. Now, the Puranas were not composed by some spiritual chat GPT one Sunday afternoon. They were composed, I think of them as the way ancient estates and homes are added to and castles are added to wing after wing. We may have a palace where you add a wing a couple generations later. So they've been added to over a great deal of time. That's not a bug, that's a feature. That's how they have always functioned. The Puranas are fluid and dynamic and aiming to be preserving the culture and the religion of the masses, the tales that are told in every crevice of Bharata. This is the essence of the Puranas. And when you pay very careful attention, the Puranas may seem uh, droll or enchanting, or they may seem superficial, but they are doing the heavy work of theology, of philosophy, of spirituality in an accessible way. When you understand, for example, Ganesha can't be Ganesha without undergoing decapitation, and then he recognizes his father, when you understand that, okay, Ganesha becomes wise by having lost his ego head
Yeah.
and gained his spiritual head, whereby he can see Purusha, he can see the divine father, which is his father in that case, Shiva. When you understand there's so much going on in these stories, you see it's profound. But the Puranic traditions are essentially, I think, the aspect of Hinduism that is the most accessible to the
Yeah.
masses.
Yeah. So Puranic. So if I look at the Puranic stories, let's say we are taking the example of Lord Ganesha, how his head got decapitated by his own father, if not the biological father, and then it got replaced by a head, and that was an elephant head. A lot of things go into your mind that, okay, how was it possible to put up an head of an elephant, then to make that entity alive? Because then you have stories of saying that head was put
Well,
up, the energy was,
let's
so is it a way of teaching us something? Are these stories a way of teaching us lessons, valuable lessons by?
all all stories, all stories. As soon as you start to tell a story, there's a set of beliefs and values that comes with it. It is impossible to tell a story without a theme or a message. So the purpose of storytelling is pedagogical. In the Indic context, that's taken to a whole new level where they're very consciously and purposely pedagogical. In the midst of the Ramayana of the Mahabharata, you'll have Rama being schooled by a sage. You'll have stories being told as teaching stories within the stories themselves, which tell us how we should relate to these stories. So there's an inextricable link between storytelling and education in the Indic context. What I would say is that, you know, part of what I do is make rational sense of narrative. So one has to really bridge the left and right brain to do that well. There are those who might say, well, in ancient India, they had surgery because Ganesha's head was transplanted in an elephant. That's buffoonery or
Yeah.
pseudoscience at best. That's ridiculous. What that stance falls prey to is needing to measure reality by empiricism, and it is an assumption that empiricism can begin to measure an individual, much less all the human experience. And so this story is spiritually true, not literally true.
Yeah.
What the story is teaching us, among other things, is the feminine doesn't need the masculine to create.
Absolutely.
Where does Ganesha come from?
Yeah.
The creatrix idea, the idea that Parvati can create of her own will. This is the power of Shakti.
Absolutely. That's very beautiful.
And B, any adolescent of any kind, especially male, understands that they argue with their parents. They become something. They go through a
Yes.
phase in life
Yeah.
where they need to be decapitated to see straight. They need to be
Yeah.
slapped upside the head, literally or figuratively. That is part of the human journey. We cannot see straight because we are born of ignorance.
Yeah.
We abide in ignorance, and life is about abating that ignorance. It's about the garnering of wisdom. So Ganesha is haughty in this story, right? He is
Adamant. Hati means adamant, right?
adamant. Yeah, he's sassy. He's rude, right? He takes his duty to protect his mother so seriously, and he's so self-important. And that is the Achilles heel. And that is why Shiva's like, I don't know what your problem is, but it's your problem, not mine. And he puts an end to that. So there is the metaphor there of if Shiva is consciousness or Purusha, consciousness, let's say, that awareness is the blade whereby we decapitate ignorance.
Mm,
This is Shiva consciousness.
mm,
It's the blade whereby we
mm,
slice through ignorance.
yeah.
And once we undergo a resurrection, we are transformed and we can see anew through the eyes of wisdom represented by the elephant.
Yeah.
There's so much beauty and power there.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But how many people can understand it on this level?
No.
But whether or not they understand it consciously, the story will teach them unconsciously.
So, Dr. Raj, now let's get into the text, the Devi Mahatmyam. Um, Devi Mahatmyam is also known by many names. It is also known by Durga Saptashati and Chandi Purana also. Chandi Purana, right? Or
Chandi Path.
Chandi Path. Path. So I want to first understand what then is the Devi Mahatmyam, the text. What is the text? Why is it known also as the Durga Saptashati and Chandi Path? And who is Durga? Who is Chandi? And who is Devi then?
So the Devi Mahatmya is the name of a Puranic text that has to do with the Mahatmya, the glories, the glorification of the Devi. I often translate it as the greatness of the goddess, but I think more apropos, I've started translating it as goddess glories. Devi Mahatmya is goddess glories. These are the glories of the goddess, her glorification, her acts of greatness, which are praised, the eulogization of the Holy Mother. That is the Devi Mahatmya, literally. Durga Saptashati means the 700 understood verses. It means Durga 700. Understood that these are the 700 verses to Durga. Interestingly enough, the Devi Mahatmya does not have 700 verses. It has under 600 verses, 500 and change. There are those who feel that this is not, there's something that we're missing or this is inaccurate. Those who take that position have not paid attention to living tradition. And living tradition makes offerings into the sacred fire from every verse or oblation. One oblation or one offering is not just a verse. You know, if it starts off with a verse and the verse is preceded by Markandeya said, Markandeya Uvacha, it would be Markandeya Uvacha Swaha. Savarni Suyatanayo, etc. Swaha. So even the so and so Uvacha is a Swaha. So Durga's 700, it's not Durga's 700 verses. It's Durga's 700 oblations or offerings, which is a nod to the extent to which this Puranic text, and this is exceptionally rare, this Puranic text is actually used as liturgy for fire sacrifice. So the entire apparatus, the entire liturgical ritual apparatus, including the verses of the Devi Mahatmya, preceded by some hymns, followed by some hymns, including a nyasa, a ritual establishment, etc. That entire apparatus is called the Chandi Path. So the Chandi Path is the ritual liturgical apparatus that features the chapters which comprise the Devi Mahatmya, of which there are 13. There are 13 chapters in the text. But part of my research shows the text has a really fascinating structure, and that structure is a cue to how it's inviting us to interpret it. But to the larger question of the name of the Devi in the Devi Mahatmya, she's often called Amba, she's often called Chandika, she's often called Devi. There are a number of names. There's a work by Thomas Coburn of a generation or so ago that traces the various names in the Devi Mahatmya. But tradition typically calls her Devi or Durga. There's one verse that's very telling when she says that I alone exist in all the worlds. She's referred to as Durga. So I think that's a tell that even in ancient times, Durga was a very common name Some people statistically go through and think, okay, well, the most common name is Chandika and Ambika, so that's what she was called. I don't get that sense. I think that she probably was always called primarily Durga because there's one verse where it's her alone and she's referred to as Durga. So Devi is generally a goddess. Um, Durga is this very popular Hindu deity that we see with many arms and many weapons, typically on a lion or a tiger, uh, which may or may not be tantamount to the primary goddess of the Devi Mahatmya. It certainly seems that way. And Chandi or Chandika is a more intense, fierce, sharp aspect of that goddess. That's typically what she's called in the ritual context. So if you wanted to commission, if you went to a temple, particularly a South Indian temple, and you wanted to commission a Durga homam, that would be just a regular service, a fire ritual to the goddess. You could do one to Vishnu, you could do one to Ganesha. If you wanted to commission the whole 9 yards of the Devi Mahatmya, they'd call that a Chandi homam. The temple may commission that once a year, and it is massive. I've been to a number of them. Massive, massive offerings. The fire is probably 10 times a regular fire. At the end, an entire sari is offered into the fire, and the fire, it's like offering, it's like offering, I don't know what to tell you, just a couple inches of cloth. The fire devours it, no problem. I mean, it's a massive undertaking. And it generates a tremendous amount of spiritual energy. It's palpable to anybody who attends. So the text has this brilliant dual citizenship in that the narrative of the text encodes crucial, profound ideas on the feminine and the feminine divine. And the utterance of the text avails the spiritual power of the feminine divine.
Let's start with the first aspect of it, the powerful aspect, the concepts of the feminine divine. What are the concepts and the philosophies of the feminine divine? Let's start with that, with respect to the text.
Consciously or unconsciously, we are members of Western civilization, whether we come from Abrahamic traditions or not, whether one is like myself, which is basically a double diasporic individual from a remotely Hindu home who benefited from the Canadian education system. Actually, all three of my graduate degrees were in Canadian institutions just by chance. Who discovered spirituality. Nevertheless, there is an unconscious indoctrination into a set of values and ideas that comes from Western civilization, the core of which is Genesis and Exodus, which sets up a world where there's a divine masculine who creates exclusively in full control and is the CEO of this cosmic company and creates man and woman. Man lords over women, creates nature. He gives nature to mankind and says, this is yours for your dominion and for your service. And he sets down the law. It's an extraordinarily masculine paradigm. The Devi Mahatmya, I'm currently working on a paper actually comparing these two. The Devi Mahatmya has an extraordinarily different view where, although there is hierarchy with the text, Indra is the king of the gods. Above Indra, there is the great gods, Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, right? And above that, perhaps there's the Devi, yet she emerges from the bodies of other beings. She emerges from the bodies of other gods. There is a sense that she is embodied. She's not transcendent. Perhaps she's also transcendent, but she's primarily and more importantly, immanent. She's not there like the Father. She's here. She's within us.
Yeah.
She is within the earth. There's a powerful hymn that's commonly a standalone hymn in chapter 5, where the gods are in trouble. They remember her blessing that she'll return if they call on her, and the gods clamber up to the highest peak, and they start reciting Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Shakti Rupena Samsita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha, to that goddess who abides in all beings in the form of Shakti. Hail, obeisance, we now bow down. They're calling upon her who abides in all beings. So in the Devi Mahatmya, we have this emphasis on the immanent We have this emphasis on the communal. It's not a hierarchical top-down pyramid scheme. She emerges to accomplish an aim to restore the throne of Indra, but she never sits on that throne herself. Her work is done, it's gone. This is feminine power.
And this, what you're talking about, is the story of how Ma Durga came into being to defeat Mahishasura. This is what you're talking about.
The story of how she came into being, she manifested to defeat Mahishasura, is interesting because what you have is, the buffalo demon usurps the throne of heaven. And of course, as we well know, when there's an idiot in charge, we all suffer. The text understands this, the perils of power. The text is about power. Shakti is understood not just as spiritual power, but by extension, it's social power. It's political power. Right? So there's an idiot on the throne who's stolen the throne of heaven. The gods are cast out. They all get together. They go to Brahma. And Brahma's like, let's go ask Vishnu. So they all hop back into the minivan and they all go drive to Vishnu's cul-de-sac. They ring his doorbell. They ask Vishnu. And Vishnu's like, I don't know. Let's go ask Shiva. So then they all get back into the minivan and they drive up the mountain. And they go to Shiva's wonderful, beautiful mountain shack. And they're like, Mahisha stole the throne of heaven. And she was like, he did what? Mahisha stole the throne of heaven. What the actual beep? He doesn't say that, but that's the vibe where he's like, he scowls in indignation. And Vishnu scowls and Brahma scowls and all of the gods get upset. And from their scowling faces is emerged a fiery energy, Tejas. And all of the Tejas from all of the gods coalesce into the staggering, monumental feminine form. Each of the energies comprises an aspect of her. The moon god's energy forms her breast, Indra forms her waist, etc., etc., etc. Yama forms her hair, etc., etc., etc. And then when she is formed, they clone their weapons and gift them to her. From Indra, she gets a vajra. From Shiva, a trident. From Varuna, a watering pot. From Brahma, a watering pot. She receives beautiful garments. She receives a lotus flower. She receives anklets and adornments of all kinds. And the Himalayan mountains gifts her with this vahana, this mount, this lion upon which she rides into war to conquer the enemy of the gods. And she does, of course, prevail. This buffalo demon, he's a little difficult to pin down. So she battles this chameleon and he transforms from a man to a buffalo to this, to that. And she pins him down and skewers him. And that is her very famous Mahishasura Mardni, easily the most popular iconographical representation of the goddess. It's a powerful mythic moment that conveys the triumph of Shakti, the power of the Holy Mother to destroy Adharma and restore the sovereignty of the gods. So she's not a deity who, and we see this in various other traditions, who subjugates and disempowers. She's a deity who empowers. She restores the power of other beings. There's so much to be said about this myth. I mean, to the untrained eye, one would think that she's created by the gods. That is not the case, because this is episode 2. In episode 1, she's there at the beginning of creation. She's there at creation. So she's already there. They don't create her, they manifest her through their collective wrath, their rage, which pours out of them, their collective outrage. Do we know a thing or two about the power of collective outrage in our times? Of course we do. This text is saying that even the greatest, most despicable despots can be quelled by collective wrath, by collective outrage. They manifest her power, but she is already there at creation, which is what we see in episode 1. So they don't create her in that she emerges from them. She is already part of creation. They channel her, we can say.
So as per episode 1, the primordial entity, let's call it the primordial entity is, according to Devi Mahatmya and Markandeya Purana, is the Shakti. It's Devi. And from that primordial entity comes all the gods, comes everything that follows the gods. So she, in a way, is the one who is even the creator of the gods. So when we do talk about the Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, according to the Devi Mahatmya and the part 1 of that, they come from her. It's like she was always omnipresent, is the word, right? She's the one who's omnipresent. And then she births the hierarchy in a way, and the great gods, and that is how the lineage of the gods follow.
The story in episode 1, it's a very, very short episode, and I make an argument that's intentional.
Let's go through that.
Part of what my PhD work shows is that episode 1, there are 3 episodes. Episode 1 is 1 chapter. Episode 2 is 3 chapters. Episode 3 is 9 chapters. So the text is tripling. 1, 3, 9. Because the text itself is showing the manifestation power of the goddess in its very structure. It's showing us she
progressing.
So episode 1 is very, very brief, but very profound in that Vishnu slumbers upon his cosmic couch and Brahma awakens in the lotus navel of Vishnu. And Brahma is about to create, but he sees out of the body of the sleeping Lord, out of one ear comes a demon, Madhu. And out of the second ear comes another demon, Kaitabha. Madhu and Kaitabha. Attachment aversion, we can say. These are the demons. Where do they come from? This is my gloss. They come from Vishnu's unconscious.
Yeah.
These are demons of the unconscious, which need to be faced. This is an ancient parable of fighting your demons. How do you fight your demons? Well, Brahma's there. He can't do anything. Brahma hymns the Divine Mother. The Divine Mother emerges from the body of Vishnu because she is the power that's creating the sleep for him. She is the Maya. She's creating the slumber for him. So she releases him from her grasp and allows him, empowers him to battle the demons, which he does through her grace. See, one of the most fascinating things about the Devi Mahatmya is it takes the feminine principles, which are problematic at best and demonized at worst in the Upanishadic strata, Maya, illusion, Prakriti, material creation. And it says, wait a minute, Maya is the feminine divine. This world in which we're in all of its technicolor glory, this is the Holy Mother. Prakriti is not insentient. Prakriti is the Holy Mother. It takes these terms and it says, wait a minute, these are the Divine Mother. These are part of the feminine principle, without which we could not propagate species, without which we could not work out our karmas, right? So, but she's not just enjoyment of this realm. What's profound about the text is she's bhakti mukti pradayini. She gives both enjoyment and she gives moksha. Okay, we'll return to that theme in a second. But what's interesting is that Vishnu is able to slay his demons because Brahma calls on the Holy Mother. And when Brahma is chanting to her in this, I think, 14-verse hymn, he praises her as the source of all creation, as the power of all things, as the power. You are the power whereby I am embodied and Vishnu is embodied. You are, and Shiva is embodied. You are the power whereby beings are embodied. We have no individual agency but for your mysterious Maya that creates this realm of embodiment. Even the gods are bound by Maya to do their dharmas, to exhaust their karmas. And so the creator is praising her at the dawn of creation. He didn't create her. She's already there. Brahma is creating at the dawn of creation, and she's already there.
So powerful. I mean, for this idea and the concept, and now I can know why you call this text very radical. We are not living in a man's world. We are living in a woman's world. This is not a man's
Amen,
world.
sister.
Yes. So this is the episode 1. Now, Dr. Raj, let's move on to the episode 2. So let's give an overview of, first of all, how many chapters are there in episode 2 and what is the basic context or the philosophy or the core of episode 2 in Devi Mahatmya.
Well, episode two is literally and figuratively the central episode, in that it is in the middle of the text, and the ancients were wise. They didn't say Prathama, Dvitiya, Tritiya, Charita, act. They said Prathama, Madhyama, Uttama. So they made sure that nobody came along and destroyed this profound structure, because the middle is the most important. When you come into the temple, the middle deity is the one you focus on. So if the
Garbhagriha.
text was a if the text was a temple, this episode would be the middle of the text.
Beautiful.
And so this episode, as mentioned earlier, this is the Mahishasura Mardni episode. Okay. This is where this has to do with the restoration of royal power. This is why the Devi is worshipped by kings. She represents the restoration and the protection of this realm. So the Devi brings things back towards this realm. It's not about moksha, 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 which is very important. It's also about the preservation of this realm and the beings within it. She does the work on the celestial level as sovereigns do on the terrestrial level. She does the work of kings. She restores Indra's royal power like no one else can. She defeats the buffalo demon, and then she's praised with the Chakradi Stuti, which is one of the four hymns and by far the most ornate Sanskrit, the most luscious Sanskrit we see in this hymn. And it's a beautiful, beautiful hymn that just praises her beyond praise. And then she's like, thank you for praising me. How can I bless you? Let me give you a boon. And they're like, well, this wasn't a please hymn. This was a thank you hymn. Like, you already given us your power back. But okay, if you want to give us a boon, please come back when we need you. They're not stupid enough to think that anything's permanent or everlasting. What goes up must come down. Okay. So there'll come a time when we'll need you again, and please return. And she's like, no problem. Whenever you remember me, call upon me, I'll come back.
Now let's come to the episode 3. So first start, Dr. Raj, with the essence of episode 3, and then we'll go into the details of episode 3. We'll talk about the 7 Matrikas, and I also want to talk about Ma Kali and everything, because I, how much ever possible, want to understand some logic and structure to how these further beings are coming out of her, and more questions will follow. So let's come to the part 3 now, episode 3. What happens in episode 3? Why does it have so many chapters? 9 chapters into it.
As to why it has so many chapters, there might be different perspectives on that. My own personal insight is around the multiplicity, the multiplying factor of the goddess, the one becoming many. So we start off with one episode being one chapter.
Yes.
We triple it. Second episode is 3 chapters. We triple it. Third episode is 9 chapters. So I think that the division of the text into 1 and 3 and 9 shows us the manifestation power of the goddess. In terms of the content, at the end of episode 2, she gives them the blessing that once they remember her, she'll return, no problem. So what happens? Well, at the beginning of episode 3, so that would be chapter 5. The gods chant the famous Yadevi hymn, because this time demons again usurp the throne of heaven. Shumba and Nishumba, these 2 brothers, they steal the power of the gods. They cast the gods out to wander the earth as mere mortals. And the gods go up and chant the famous Yadevi Sarvabhuteshu, to that goddess who abides in all beings, him. Not who abides in just the gods or beyond the gods or the supreme power of creation. She abides in all beings. That's a radical and important idea. Divinity is not something in there, where the earth plane and embodiment and ecology are an obstruction to divinity. They are a manifestation of divinity. So this is a radical view. This is an orientation towards the world that we don't see. We don't see this in Hinduism before the Devi Mahatmya. We don't see this radical valuation of all beings and the world itself. Prakriti is not a problem. Prakriti is the divine. So they chant this famous Yal Devi hymn, and then the goddess manifests, sort of beautiful, resplendent along the mountainside. And what happens? Two sort of messengers come along, um, Chanda and Munda, pretty sure, and they see this beautiful, sort of mind-bogglingly beautiful woman, and they report back to their henchmen, Shumba and Nishumba, right? And they're like, okay, well, she has to be my wife, so go give her an ultimatum. So this is the mother of the universe, right? And so they're mistaking, just like Ganesha was mistaking who Shiva was before he can see straight. You know, similarly, these demons are deluded. They view the feminine form and feminine force as something to be possessed, to be owned, to be commodified. They say to her, "You are a jewel among women. You should belong to our overlord because he owns the best SUVs, the best homes. He owns all the bling, and you, baby, are bling. So you should belong to our demon overlord." See, it's a brilliant. The text is an ancient Indic cautionary tale against the objectification and commodification of the feminine. That's the
Beautiful.
fatal flaw. That's the fatal flaw of the demons. That's their fatal flaw. And what does she do? She knows they're deluded as whatever you want to say. They're totally deluded. So she plays into their delusion. Oh, you know, that sounds like maybe a great idea, but I can't. You see, I made this silly promise to myself years ago. And the promise was the only man I'd marry is he who could kick my ass in battle. And they're like,
Yes.
oh, don't be so arrogant. A little projection there, right? Don't be so arrogant, goddess. They're going to drag you by your hair. What can I do? I made this vow. Run along. She's behaving like a coquettish, Barbie doll because that's how they perceive her. It's
Yeah.
profound. This
Yeah.
is the power of Maya.
Yeah.
Maya shows you what you want to see.
Yeah. Like a damsel in distress. She's acting like one.
Yes, because but they are approaching her like a
Cavemen.
compromised,
Yeah.
feeble. When you are Tarzan, all you see is Jane, and
Yeah.
Jane knows you're Tarzan, but she's
Yeah.
not Jane. So she's like, "Oh, you want Jane? I'll present Jane."
Yeah.
Okay, I'm so sorry, but it's clever. I'm so dumb. I made this promise that I'll only marry a man who will kick my ass in battle. And they're like, "Oh, don't say that! Don't say that! They're gonna drag you by hair." Just go. What can I do? I've already made this promise. Run along, and they run along. They tell their demon overlord, and this begins the process where embassy after embassy from the demons comes to destroy the goddess, to subjugate her, to drag her by her hair. You know, I believe the first one in chapter 6 is a general on behalf of the demon army called Dhumra Lochana. Lochana, eyes, Dhumra, smoke. One of the great names of Lord Rahu is Dhumravarana, Dhumravarana Namaha. So, smoke eyes. Do you think he's seeing straight, Mr. Smoky Eyes? So, Smoke Eyes comes and threatens her, and she lets out a mantra, and the mantra reduces him to ashes. And in episode 7, I believe, chapter 7, they send now Chanda and Munda to go and grab her by her hair and bring her. Chanda and Munda come and they make a mad dash to grab her by their hair. And she's like, who the beep do you think you are? And she's pissed off. And from her scowl, from her wrath, from her righteous wrath, from her justified indignation, comes this incredible entity. From her third eye is born this gruesome, emaciated, terrible form, donning a garland of skulls. Kali. Kali is born from the wrath of Durga. And what does she do? She basically goes to Chanda and Munda and chops off their heads and brings them back to Durga or the Devi as a trophy. And just, okay, here, I have a present for you. Special delivery from Mother Durga. Sign here. And the mother says, since you have brought me the heads of Chanda and Munda, from this day forth, you'll be known as Chamunda. And so one of the great mantras that we see in the Chandi Path, in the recitation, one of the mantras that's ritually invoked in the limbs and the fingers in the nyasa in the establishment is this Navarna mantra. Om Aim Hlim Klim Chamunda Ye Che. So Chamunda is actually created by the ferocity of the goddess in response to the virulence and the impropriety of the demons who want to basically drag her by her hair to be the property of their overlord. You see? And so this is the creation of Chamunda or Kali. Now, what happens? Do you think Shumba and Nishumba, the demons, get the message? Durlochana is now living in some ashtray somewhere. Chanda and Munda are trophies of war. Does he get the message? No. He goes, no, let's bring out the big guns. Let's bring out the nukes. Wake up, Rakta Bija. Rakta is seed. Rakta is blood. Bija is seed. Blood seed. Right? What's blood seed? Well, he has this power that whenever a drop of his blood hits the earth, another demon is born, and that demon has the same power. There are some very sticky problems in this world, sticky situations. So if you want some high voltage, if you want some powerful antibiotics, if you want some sort of high voltage solutions, this text is mythologizing the power of sadhana to these deities, right? You have this Raktibija coming now, and the goddess now manifests the Saptamatrikas, 7 mothers. There's much we could say about that, but now there's 7 mothers, there's armies, and they're engaging, and now whenever they're battling Raktibija, and a drop of his blood falls to the earth, they're everywhere. What do we do? What do we do? And Durga commands Kali and says, go forth and use your lolling tongue and lap up every drop of blood as we gash these demons galore and tear them into shreds. And Kali goes forth with her lolling tongue and laps up every drop of blood as the army of the mother annihilates the demons. And that demon fell to the earth bloodless. Do you think he gets the message after that? No. Why? No. Why not? Why try awareness and wisdom and humility? This arrogant tyranny is working for me. So let's just send. There's no one else left to send. Now his brother goes. Chapter 9 is Nishumba is the king. Shumba is the dominant one. So Nishumba goes. And of course, the goddess pulverizes Nishumba. Now no one is left. Shumba alone is left. Chapter 10. He rides into battle to face her and the army of the mother. And he says something very, very interesting. It's a really, really fascinating moment where he basically says, at the outbreak of battle, the enemies of the gods puffed up with pride, right? He was sort of puffed up with pride, but he's accusing her of being puffed up with pride. He says, O Durga, wicked and proud of your strength, do not display your pride for me. You rely on the strength of others to fight with your inflated sense of importance. Right? So it's projection. He's like, you're just relying on all these other creatures.
Yeah, he's a narcissist. He's blaming the
Devi
other.
Vacha, of course. Devi Vacha, the goddess, said, I alone here exist in all the world. What second to I exists? Behold, bastard, all these manifestations of my power now enter back into me. Thereupon all the goddesses, led by Brahmani, the Saptamatrikas, the first one's Brahmani. Thereupon all the goddesses, led by Brahmani, went to their resting place in the abode of the goddess. Then there was just the mother alone. The goddess said, I've now withdrawn my many forms, established here by my tremendous power. I stand here utterly alone, on guard, irresolute in battle. and a fierce battle ensues between Shumba and the goddess. Sometimes they're fighting in midair. They're creating cataclysmic upheaval. The mountains are rocking. The earth is suffering from this great cataclysmic battle. But of course, eventually, in the right time, guess who prevails? Pierced by the tip of the goddess's spear, his life breath now departed. He fell to the ground, shaking the earth, causing oceans and islands and mountains to tremble. When that wicked one was slain, the universe was soothed, regaining its natural order once more, and the sky became spotless again. The flaming clouds of portent that formerly had gathered became tranquil, and the rivers flowed once again within their banks when Shumba was felled. The host of gods were overjoyed when the demon lord was slain, and the celestial musicians sang aloud with joyous gay abandon. Others resounded their instruments, and the celestial nymphs danced about. The winds of favor began to blow, and the sun shone brightly as before. The sacred fires peacefully blazed, and the din that filled the air was gone. And so now, chapter 11 is praise. They chant in chapter 11 the very famous Narayani Namostute hymn. Sarva Mangala Mangalye, I believe, is in that hymn. And then she prophesies that time and time again she'll come into being for the restoration of Dharma and the protection of the world. And chapter 12 is the Palashruti, which talks about, she goes on about all of the benefits of hearing and reading her Mahatmya for we mortals. And then chapter 13, I'll return to in a moment, but that's the frame. I'll return to that in a moment. That's a very, very important frame. That's the frame of who is hearing and who is telling the story, the conversation between ascetic and king.
Can we take up one hymn, whichever is your favorite, from before the 13th chapter? And I want to understand from you why hymns are beautiful and why any particular hymn that you... And first of all, Dr. Raj, what is a hymn? Is it a mantra? Is it a shloka? Is it aphorism? What is a hymn? Is it a rap? Is it a music? It is rock, metal? I want to know what is a hymn first, and then we'll take an example of your favorite hymn, and I want you to explain that why is it profound and magical and amazing. So let's start with the definition of a hymn.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that a hymn is a eulogization, a sort of an exaltation of the qualities of something.
Okay.
Just like one has a eulogy at a funeral.
Yeah.
But unlike a funeral, a hymn is a eulogization that typically has meter and melody. It's typically sung or chanted. A mantra is a sacred utterance. A hymn may serve as a mantra, but there are mantras which are not hymns. So there are sacred utterances that are not hymns. But I would say that all hymns in the Indic context, all hymns can serve as sacred utterances. So in your spiritual practice, you may be saying things which are hymns or not hymns. Okay. But all hymns can be used in spiritual practice. Okay. All divine eulogies are sacred utterances, but not all sacred utterances are divine eulogies. Okay. So in terms of the Devi Mahatmya, I mean, it all depends, right? I mean, that Ya Devi hymn is extraordinarily compelling because it is celebrating the presence of the deity in all beings as various qualities and states. So it is fascinating to contemplate all of the qualities. Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu ex Rupena Samsita.
Shakti, Buddhi.
And the Buddhi, Raja, Jati, earth, right? And the last one is brilliant. Bhranti, bewilderment, confusion. Bhranti Rupena Samsita. What do you mean? She's Maya. Hers is the presence. Her presence confers upon us the bewilderment of embodied existence, whereby we experience ourselves as separate from all things. That is a state of bewilderment. But that bewilderment is not an obstruction to divinity. It is divine. It is her divine blessing, which gives the bewilderment of podcast host and podcast guest and something to podcast about. This is the beautiful bewilderment of material creation. And so it's very compelling. I would say some of the most beautiful ideas are in the Chakradi Stuti. Chakra is Indra. So the Chakradi Stuti, Indra and the rest. Indra and the gods. So once she defeats Mahisha, which I think is the central episode, it's the most important episode. It's central because it has to do with the restoration of royal power. And we'll touch on this in a bit, but the text is being told by a king, told by a sage in a forest to a king who's lost his power. And in
this is the part. This is the episode 3. We are coming to episode 3 now.
Chapter 13.
Chapter 13, right? Which is the episode?
The frame.
The frame.
Yeah.
Okay.
The frame narrative is a king loses his power, goes into the forest, receives all the teachings you received today, then goes off to worship the goddess and regains his throne. So the restoration of royal power, the restoration of sovereignty is crucial because the text itself is telling you the application of these teachings is empowerment and sovereignty. Jaya Jaya, victory. Be victorious against those who would steal our power.
But with the aid of the Divine Mother. That's
the aid. Absolutely. If you need help, she's there to help, but she's not doing it for you. He has to go. The king worships her. Now there's a merchant companion, and this is interesting. A merchant. The king finds a merchant. They're both upset. They both go to the sage for counsel. The sage teaches them all of these teachings on the Holy Mother. And then at the end, he goes, therefore, go worship her. So the king and the sage go off and they create a murti of clay upon a riverbank. And they engage in puja or upasana for 3 years. They offer incense and flame and fruits and flowers. And at times they offer even the blood of their own limbs. And after 3 long years, sometimes they're fasting, sometimes they're eating. With steadfast mind, they're singing these hymns and praises. And the mother manifests. And the mother says, I'm pleased by your penance. Your wish is my command. What would you like? What boon would you like? And the merchant says, I'm so sick of this existence, the suffering. The merchant was cast out of his house by his thieving wife and children. They stole his wealth and cast him out, and that's how he ended up in the forest. And he found this ashrama. And he says, I would like to wake up. I want to be done. I want that knowledge which transcends I-ness and my-ness, takes us beyond ego. She's like, sure, no problem. And the king says, I want my kingdom back. Do you think the Divine Mother rebukes him and says, you should be more detached like your merchant friend? No, because she understands that without those who prioritize the welfare of the world, what hope is there for the future? What hope is there for our species? Creation is important. She understands the work of kings because she performs the work of kings. The work of kings is to protect, and she protects at every turn. This is her power. Her power is used to protect and to empower other creatures. And so she says, okay, king, no problem. In 3 days' time, encounter your foe, and by my grace, you will succeed. And this is what happens. She doesn't say, I'll fight them for you, baby. Don't you worry. Sit here. Have some more cookies. Just relax. She says, no, go fight your foe, but with my grace, you will succeed. And then she says, by the way, I'm going to top up your boon because, this moksha thing is great. But this other thing, this laukika thing, this worldly thing, it's really important. So not only will you gain your kingdom, not only will it be yours for the rest of your days, but at the end of your life, you will attain a new birth as the son of Surya, the sun, and you will be the Manu of the next age. Savarni. She promotes him to another status of preservation and protection, leadership.
Why this extra cherry on the top? Because she she understands that this man will be important in the future, or she understands that this
She
man is
makes him
not asking.
important. It's not that he will be important. She blesses him with that importance because he's worthy of that importance, because he is dharmically wielding his office for the welfare of the people.
Had he asked for moksha, then the entire story would have been different. Because then he's not acting with his dharma, right?
Had he asked for moksha, he would not have been paying attention to the text, because the text talks about moksha and the importance of seeing through delusion 100%. But the text equally, and in my view, what I try to show in the PhD that I've done is even more so, the text prioritizes royal ideology over ascetic ideology. Both royal ideology and ascetic ideology are there. That's why it's pitched between a conversation between an ascetic and a king. And that's why she gives two boons, because she's supreme. So she can take you out of this creation, or she can make you master of this creation, whatever you wish. But her role is to preserve this realm. So it tilts towards pravritti over nivriti.
Absolutely.
And this is radical in Indic ideology. This is the radical idea.
Beautiful.
That this world is more important than moksha.
I want to go into the next set of questions, but before that, okay, in the last episode that we did, we touched upon the concept of consciousness. And you said that consciousness is a thing by which we can know everything else. Okay. So if science is trying to understand consciousness by its material tools, it's like a dog who's trying to catch his own tail. Because I understand. What I want to really know, there are a lot of people who do sadhanas, homas, and I'm not talking specifically about Shakti sadhana. People can do Durga sadhana, people can do Kali sadhana. There are texts, there are tantric methodologies which tell you how to do it. And then there are stories of people who said, "Ki I have, we have done the sadhana of a particular deity." Let's say we're talking about Ma Durga. Ki we did the sadhana of Ma Durga, we reached up to the state, we reached up to a stage, and now we have perfected that sadhana, which they call Siddhi. And they say, ki now we can see her. She comes to us, and we have that access. So what I want to understand, when people say that I've reached or I've perfected a sadhana of Ma Durga, of Ma Kali, and we see her, what is the meaning? Do they mean that we have now reached the consciousness of Ma Durga? That our mind has now merged in her consciousness, and now we can understand everything from her point of view? Or is it really the physical aspect of that entity that they are seeing? So I want to know, where does consciousness as a concept fit in with the deification of Devi, for example?
Those who see do not say, and those who say do not see. Because the minute it is said, it is an object. It is objectified. If one has an experience that is part of oneself, then one abides in that experience. One does not objectify that experience. Those who objectify the experience either have not had it, or they sully it by objectifying it. Spirituality is not about prostituting ideas and experiences. It is about the invitation and the cultivation to make love, not make porn.
Beautiful.
And so the camera can go off when you're making love. And if the camera is on, it's not love, my dear. And if it once was love, it stops being love when the camera is on, because now it's performance. And so those who have had experiences of the Divine Mother, typically, not always, do not speak. And those who speak, typically, but not always, are empty vessels which make the most noise, because they are ensconced in delusion. And so those who are deluded give great fodder for materialism and for rationalism, because rationalism is that whereby we can safeguard against dogma, superstition, and delusion. 100%. But rationalism is also whereby we safeguard against mysticism, against direct experience. Now, we can think of perhaps Shakti as a conscious spiritual force.
Yeah.
So where there is Shakti, there is Shiva. Where there is Shiva, there is Shakti. Typically, those who accrue Shakti also accrue awareness. Not always, but typically, those who accrue energy in these contexts also accrue awareness. When Shakti is bereft of that ordering conscious principle, it is erratic and wild and extraordinarily dangerous. But typically, Shakti is cultivated, alloyed with the ordering presence of consciousness. You could think of energy and consciousness as two sides of the same coin. Where attention goes, it's consciousness. Energy flows, that's Shakti. This is why the attention seekers are also energy vampires. They like to suck energy by stealing attention. This is not something esoteric. We experience this. The ones who are the most provocative and want to seek the most attention, what they wish to do is extract your energy and benefit from it, become energized as you are depleted and exhausted by their bullshit. So there are many ways to think about it. It's not a zero-sum game. It's extraordinarily complex. But at the end of the day, those who have had an experience of Shakti are not those eager to put the ineffable into words, because they understand how foolish that is. Those who are eager to put their divine experiences into words are those who have not had those experiences.
Makes sense. And I think you also said that those who have not had experience of Shakti, they don't know unconditional love. Because that is what you get. That is unconditional love.
I would say so. I would say there definitely is a connection. And what I was alluding to earlier is that the Divine Mother strolls through creation day in and day out. She does and she doesn't. And so she would accept, in the analogy that you presented, she would accept Japan and the Netherlands and India, and that this is just the working out of karmas in this realm. People need a karmic consequence to learn. You may have a loved one who's suffering from addiction, serious addiction, and they need to drive off the cliff before they wake up. And so we will get through the climate crisis, but it has to get a little bit worse before it gets a whole lot better. And it'll take us probably a couple hundred years, is my estimation. A couple hundred years or so to really settle into a society that just has the wisdom to not piss on the planet every time it gets from A to B. But that wisdom itself would be innate in a society which honored the Divine Mother as the earth itself, as opposed to more masculine religious ideas, which focus on sky gods and focus on transcendence and see as an oversight the divinity of this realm. Right? What is one of the most pejorative terms you can use in sort of the Abrahamic world? Pagan. Yeah. And what are pagan practitioners typically? Those who venerate nature, God forbid. God forbid we revere nature.
Yeah. Dr. Raj, now there's one more question that I wanted to ask you before I move on to the practical aspects of the Devi Mahatmya. And I'm going to take a use case, very small use case. Dr. Raj, broadly speaking, it is known that the Divine Mother has the four broad parts or the four broad characteristics. One they say is the Maheshwari, the Mahalakshmi, the Mahasaraswati, and the Mahakali. Are these forms, specifically the Mahasaraswati and the Mahalakshmi form, Are they mentioned somewhere in the Devi Mahatmyam? Because Kali, you just said it's she emanated from her. Is Mahalakshmi or Lakshmi or Mahasaraswati or Saraswati, these terminologies, do they also make a reference in the Devi Mahatmyam? If not, where do these things then come from? Where does these forms of the mother come from? Were they not existing in those times? Did they manifest later in the evolution of the human history? I'm very intrigued to know. Or are there more forms of the Divine Mother that we as human beings are not aware of, that still have not manifested in the earth realm? What's your take on this?
I think that name and form is a function of perception. So, in a certain sense, Shakti or the divine is beyond our perception. In another sense, we create God in our image.
Yes,
we create Goddess in our image. Yeah. And so, in a certain sense, the various forms are a function of human perspective. Right? In terms of these overarching manifestations, the Devi Mahatmya, the 3 episodes of the Devi Mahatmya, in the context of ritual invocation, in the context of ritual recitation or fire ritual, they're each dedicated to a different aspect. So episode 1 is dedicated to Mahakali, and there's a dhyana and Mahakali before the recitation of episode 1. Episode 2 is dedicated to Mahalakshmi, and there's a meditation to Mahalakshmi before the recitation of episode 2. Episode 3 is dedicated to Mahasaraswati, and there's a meditation on Mahasaraswati before the recitation of episode 3. Now, this journey from Mahakali to Mahalakshmi to Mahasaraswati is tantamount to the journey moving through tamas, rajas, and sattva. So by the end of the text, whether reciting it, whether intoning it over ritual fire, whether reading it, whether hearing it, ideally the consciousness will become more sattvic through the process of engaging the various themes. So we could think of Mahadevi or Adi Shakti as the source, and we could think of Mahakali, Mahalakshmi, and Mahasaraswati as divinizations of the gunas of Prakriti, tamas, rajas, and sattva.
Could there be more forms of the Divine Mother that the human being is not aware of, that has yet not manifested on the earth realm? Is it possible that there could be...
Could there be more melodies yet to be composed with the same scales we know today? Of course. Of course. The question is which melodies are to our taste, which ones arise in our minds, which ones last. And so we are talking about, when we talk about melodies, we're talking about the creative generation of the many using a simple set of notes. So there is no end to the multiplicity of the many. It goes on ad infinitum. There is no end. It's limitless. Yeah. The divine is limitless in its oneness. The divine is also limitless in its multiplicity.
Beautiful. Dr. Raj, I now come to the last part, wherein I want to now get into the practical aspect. So I'm going to take a use case. So I am somebody who is really fascinated by the Mother Divine, her philosophy, her concept, her stories, her text. I think, me personally, I resonate with her a lot. I really like her style, to put it simply. I like her style. When somebody says that escapism is not the way, you have to engage, I love it. That's music to my ears. That's how I'm constituted. That is why I also like the way Krishna leads his life. Flamboyant, does everything. I love that part. Now, what I have been doing so far when it comes to my adoration and my sadhana, if I can call it even sadhana, towards the Divine Mother, is just think about her. Is just think about her. Oh, yeah, Divine Mother. Yeah, Divine Mother. Ma, Divine Mother. That's it. Nothing else. If, let's say, I want to start, someone like me wants to go deep into the philosophy of the Devi and start a sadhana, can I do it with the Devi Mahatmyam? If I can, what are the steps? First thing, obviously, is to read the text. Okay, I've read the text. Then, what can I do next? Can I take certain hymns from that? Are there certain mantras that I can then find a guru, get initiated, and deepen my practice? So, what I'm basically asking in today's time, if somebody wants to go deep into the Devi Sadhana, where does the Devi Mahatmyam gets placed itself? Can it be the only and the primary source for somebody to transcend and go deep into the sadhana for the Divine Mother? Is what I want to know.
I think there are many sadhanas that come from a variety of traditions, whether Sri Vidya, etc., etc.
Yes, yes.
In terms of the Devi Mahatmya, there are also many iterations of the Devi Mahatmya. There are comics, there are sort of ancient artistic iterations. There are audiobooks. One can certainly read it in translation in their vernacular, whatever that is. Some people may want to read or chant it in the Sanskrit. So there are no shortage of ways to engage the ideas and the text proper. In terms of particular sadhana, the hymns function fairly well as standalone hymns, especially the hymn in chapter 5, the Yadevi hymn, and the hymn in chapter 11, Narayana Namostute. These two hymns are very, very common. And there are even verses within the hymns that you can chant, right? And these are open. I mean, there's no need for initiation for these. These are ubiquitous. These are common sort of Hindu public domain, you can say.
Yeah.
In terms of a mantra from the Devi Mahatmya itself, there is that common Navarna mantra, which is often chanted, whether both chanted within the context of the Devi Mahatmya and also chanted as a standalone practice, this Om Aim Hrim Klim Chamudai Viche. There have been students of mine who have had sort of incredible experiences and results with that particular mantra. But I think it has to do with one's temperament, what one is drawn to, what are your symptoms, what are you looking for? But also, if you're going to veer away from the over-the-counter medicines and try to take up some of the prescription drugs, then clearly you'll want some pharmacological knowledge, or you want some guidance or direction. You may want to work with someone or have the guidance of someone you trust in terms of whether a sadhana would suit you. But there's lots and lots and lots of over-the-counter prescriptions.
So it can aid you. That this text can aid you to deepen your practice in sadhana towards the Divine Mother. Understanding this text.
Not only can, it can't not.
Please explain that. It
not only can not, it,
can't not.
It can't not. Its very purpose is personal and spiritual evolution. Yeah. That's its function.
Dr. Raj,
there is no way to engage the text and not deepen one's understanding and relationship with the Divine Mother.
Makes sense. One more question, Dr. Raj, and this always used to bother me, and I really want some help and clarification on this thing. All the pujas and rituals that I see right now, all the tantric practices that I see right now, towards any deity, towards any entity, it seems the reason people are doing it more or less, I'm not saying that everybody is doing it for the same reason, but the general public, those who are engaging in such practices, are doing it in lieu that we'll get something in return. There is an aspect of transaction. The same reason why people go to astrologers for remedies. They want something to happen. They do yagnas and homas. They invite priests. They offer chadav in temples and everything. A lot of examples of tantric sadhanas and rituals that I have heard about on various podcasts and books. I started doing the puja of Mahakali because this is what I wanted. Now, because I don't believe in transaction, I always used to keep myself away from such things. I'm like, I don't need anything from her. So what I am trying to ask, why is the devotion and sadhana of Devi specifically Devi, which can happen with all gods, but specifically Devi being reduced to a mere transaction. Why there are very few people, at least in the public domain, who just do it for the sake of loving her or adoring her. Because the majority of the examples that we get is, I did this for these many days and this is what I got. So the transaction part is something that I don't understand, and I just want you to tell me, that is the transaction the only reason why people get into it? Can I not just do it without any expectations?
Most of us are lucky to have a mother who raised us. Many of us are fortunate enough to still have her alive, maybe not. And the dharma of the mother is to take care of the needs, sometimes the wants of the child. So people are looking for some help, some support. But I feel that just as in the real realm, the sociological realm of relating to one's mother, along with the spiritual realm of relating to the Divine Mother, there are individuals who are more egotistical and don't realize their mother is a person who has needs and wants, and their mother never becomes a person in their mind outside of being the instrument of satisfying their needs and wants. And so there are those who, everybody loves their mother in a certain sense, but there are those who actively show love and care and empathy, who may want to get to know and connect with their mothers. And there are those who cannot outgrow the idea or the sort of sociological reality that this is the person I come to when I have a problem or a concern. And so I think it is similar with spirituality.
So if there are even expectations or if there is transaction, I think it's what you're saying is natural. It's natural for someone to go to their mothers.
On the one hand, it is natural. On the other hand, as soon as we talk about large numbers, the masses, we talk about lowest common denominators. So there's a difference whether something is mainstream or whether something's rarefied. There may be a great many people who honor and worship the Divine Mother, and they may or may not have some desires. Yes. There are very few people who are looking for spiritual evolution, whether they worship the Divine Mother or not. So these are different orders of reality and orders of magnitude of engaging the transformative power of these texts and traditions.
Makes sense. Dr. Raj, with this, we come to the end of the conversation. Is there anything crucial that you think we have missed? Is there one last thing that you'd like to add around the text that you feel that did not get discussed, that did not get explored because of any reason, because of my lack of understanding? If there's anything that you'd like to say at the end around this text that you feel that would be very important, love to hear that.
I think I wish to end with an idea that I stated at the outset, that this text operates on multiple levels, and the multiple levels upon which it operates are the various very levels of your own being. So I would invite audiences to engage the text on the level of their interest. It might be on the intellectual level. You may wish to do some research and understand the historical context as best you can, understand its reception history. There are those who may be wishing to engage it on the emotional level and maybe enjoy the stories and hear the stories and tell the stories. There are those who may wish to engage it on the spiritual level of doing sadhana. So it is a multifaceted, multi-dimensional text that I would invite folks to engage on the terms of their priorities and their interests.
Beautiful. That is amazing. There are a lot of things that you said in this episode, Dr. Raj, which was just truly remarkable. Absolutely revolutionary in a way of thinking. Specifically the idea about her asking us to preserve this realm is so profound. And I think this is so basic idea as well. The idea that what the Devi Mahatmya represents, it's so powerful. It's very profound, Dr. Raj. And that is why we get you again on a podcast, and we'll keep on getting you on more subjects.